What's up, y'all? It's your girl, Anim Ale, and I'm back. I know I've been gone a while. I actually just came back from a travel assignment for the past 13 weeks. If you aren't aware of travel social work, definitely look into it. If you want more information, how to jump into it, how to get more experience so you can qualify for more travel jobs, make sure you check out my video around travel social work. It has lots of great information. So I wanted to come back and discuss more in depth about the immigration evaluations and assessments. That was something that I got a lot of questions on. So I want to help you get started in this game for free. That's right, for free. So I'm giving you my knowledge around immigration evaluations and assessments for free today. So get your pens and paper out. Before you do that, if you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, share this with anybody who you think will value this content or, just would benefit from this type of information. All right, so let's get into it. So in the other video, my earlier video, we talked about like marketing, we talked about getting started, and I just want to re-emphasize, like, marketing is a verb, right? Those are actions that you have to take on a daily basis. Things are not suddenly going to come to you just because you got trained in immigration evaluations and assessments. You have to do active work on a consistent basis, just like if you were running your private practice. You have to actively market yourself, and marketing can look differently. So yes, you need to be actively figuring out what your marketing strategies are going to look like and what's going to make the most sense for you in order to get those clients. So just like you would in your private practice, you will do the exact same thing here with immigration evaluations and assessments. So I think it's important for us to start and understand what we're looking at, right? So there are different types of assessments. And primarily what you're going to see across the board, generally speaking, is you may see people coming for hardship evaluations, and I'll go into details. VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act, even though it should be expanded to all people because we know that intimate partner violence happens across all genders, and so that's neither here nor there. You'll get U visa, and asylum. Those are probably the four more common ones that I see. There are some assessments and evaluations that are exclusive only to psychologists and medical doctors. So the four that I mentioned earlier are pretty much anybody can do them, right? Any degree type, as long as you're independently licensed, and any person can do those assessments, those mental health evals, regardless of degree type. And so primarily what you're going to see is that, and yes, I'm reading from my notes, so I want to make sure that I get you everything, all right? So primarily what you're going to see is that there are people who are, coming to you for a multitude of reasons, primarily around those types of evaluations that I mentioned earlier. So there are going to be people who are fleeing persecution. Unfortunately, there are going to be people that are, they are looking to, they've been impacted and, have experienced some sort of trauma in their home country and are fleeing that situation and coming here for safety. There are issues about abandonment, parental abuse. Pretty much, if you can think about it, like, these are the types of kind of situations that people are fleeing from or trying to escape from. And coming to the United States is an opportunity for them to escape that situation. And so that is sort of like the crux of these assessments and evaluations. So next up, I want to talk about, questions for the legal staff. So in an ideal situation, ideal world, an attorney or the client might reach out to you. And so the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you have consent forms signed by your client. Once you have approved and like you guys are agreeing to work together, that you have some sort of consent form that says, okay, we're going to work together. I may need to talk to your attorney, like informed consent, similar to private practice again. So some of the questions that you always want to ask your attorney can look like any of the following, right? So can you tell me more about this particular type of legal case? and the argument that you're making to the judge or the official on behalf of the client. What information are you hoping my assessment letter will cover? This is really a great question, because not only does it help you understand the scope, or like how much detail to put in your assessment, or your report rather, but it also helps you kind of just, focus it in the right direction. Are there any areas of the case that you do not need, or you do not want me to discuss in this report or this letter? And again, that helps you kind of write a report that's concise, to the point, and kind of to the, these attorneys do this day in and day out. So they're quite familiar with the process. They know what they want. They know what the judges are looking for. So they can be a really great resource, and you want to make sure you utilize them. Will the client themselves need to testify in front of the judge? Well, I need to testify in front of the judge. Oftentimes people are concerned about that. Like, will I have to be in front of a judge? And so there are times where it may have to happen, In my personal experience, I haven't had to go before a judge thus far, but it's not something that's completely out of the question to ask. I would also ask, are there any documents or client statements that would be helpful for me to read in advance? So sometimes I've had attorneys send me like the official paperwork when the individual applied for asylum status, or the like official documentations of like, when they first met with their attorney and they went over everything that happened. So I've had attorneys send me that paperwork, and I've read through that. And so going through that can be really helpful, just to get some of the meat of the information that may not be helpful in going through when you are meeting with the client, for various reasons that we'll talk about. And the last question I would say is, am I generally able to cover topics assessments? Does that sound like it would be helpful? Like, again, asking the attorney what they think would be helpful in this process. And I think that would help you write a stronger report for this attorney, which again, work with your attorney, use them as a resource, because they tend to know everything. They tend to know a lot, because again, this is something that they do day in and day out, and with like hundreds of people. So interviewing day, let's talk about that, what that looks like. So again, you went through the process, this client's reached out to you, or the attorney has reached out to you, and you guys have agreed to work together in this capacity. And so here are some tips in terms of like preparing for the interview. So logistics, you want to figure out scheduling, things like that. Obviously, if you need an interpreter, it's not a must that you speak the native tongue of the individual, but it is really important that you get, or you're able to get access to, an interpreter that does speak that language, that native language. And not just anybody speaking the native language, because I've had incidents where I've had an interpreter where they spoke a particular said language as my client, right? But then there was different dialects. They didn't really understand the medical terminology that was coming up. So it created this disconnect. Like, my report was like completely off from what the client was stating. Luckily, I was able to work with the client's daughter, with the client's permission, to go over some of the details and clarify a lot of the pieces. So that was really helpful for me. So make sure you vet your interpreters, because that's really important. They can make or break your report. Make sure you understand what software you're using, and as far as video conferencing. So are you using Zoom? I always use Zoom. I always send my clients Zoom links. Google Meetup, I think it's called. If you have Google Workspace, then it is BAA certified, so you don't have to worry about anything. Preparation work, again, you want to make sure you review those critical facts from your attorney, going through all that, making sure that you have all necessary documents that you may need. It's not necessary that you need anything in particular, but just kind of having a good understanding of the background, right, of this client, just like you would in any like mental health outpatient setting. Like, you have like a referral sheet, you kind of understand a little bit of what's coming your way. It's sort of similar to experience. Communication, asking clarifying questions to the attorney and also to your client, explaining what you are going to provide, explain what makes your role a little different from like a general, we're all mental health therapists, but what makes your role a little different in this particular setting, in this particular space right now that we're in. All right, so we talked enough about the background stuff. Let's get into the actual assessment. So here are some tips that I think can help you have a really successful, or help you be really successful in conducting your immigration interview. I think what's most important is to remind yourself what is your purpose in doing this assessment, right? What is your purpose in collecting this information? And so it's really important, like I said earlier, to start with explaining your role. Like, how does your role as an evaluator vary or differ from being a therapist role, right? Explaining the purpose of the interview. So one of the things that I always say to my clients, like, I know a lot of this stuff may be really difficult to recall or to talk about, and I want you to let me know if I'm asking things that are, causing you to feel uncomfortable. But I do want to let you know that it's really important to like have me understand as much as possible so I can write a stronger report to support your case in petitioning for, whichever, case they're petitioning for, like the ones I mentioned earlier. So that's something, a conversation that I have with them early on. It's also important to establish rapport really quickly with these clients. So that can happen between the moment you guys get introduced to when you're actually doing the assessment. And just that can just look like a lot of ways of just like checking in with them, like, oh, how are you doing with the technology? Is this okay with you? Does tell me about, like, asking about like the biographical history, like, tell me when your birthday is, tell me what growing up was like. For some people that can be triggering, some people not so much. So just, you will kind of understand your client the more you go further in your assessment. So like, use your discretion and your clinical judgment about that. I think the other thing that's really important about this is being trauma informed. And as therapists, we get that. I think I can confidently say that we all understand the concept around being trauma informed. And so using those skills to make sure that you check in with that client, you let them know that, hey, I understand, like, is it okay if I ask you about this? Like, how are you feeling about that question? I know that could have been really intense. Checking in with your client as frequently as possible. And again, using your sound clinical judgment to understand how that process is going for them. And so really, really being big on trauma-informed spaces and care, especially in this trauma-related immigration cases, because I would say 99% of them are connected to some sort of trauma that they have experienced or been exposed to, unfortunately. So just being mindful of that and using that lens when coming into the space. I think it's important, again, depending on what you're setting your time frame for, right? Are you doing an hour session? Are you doing a 2-hour session? Whatever that looks like. Are you prioritizing the information on your assessment that you need first, right? So again, I do hour sessions. I typically do 2 1-hour sessions to get all the information that's needed. And that's totally up to you. And again, your pricing, you figure all that out and do whatever works for you. So make sure you do that. Allowing the client as much control over the assessment as possible. Again, when we think about that trauma-informed lens, and not necessarily being the sort of gatekeeper or reinforcing some of these ideas that can come when you're working with a marginalized person. So being mindful of all of those pieces as you are working with this client. Explain your reason for asking the traumatic questions. Again, like I said, I always check in with my clients about some of this traumatic stuff. And I just have them let me know how you're feeling about this. Let me know if that's too much. Let me know if if that's not something you want to talk about right now. That's totally okay. Use open-ended questions that are tuned to your client. Use objective measures to assess mental health symptoms. So I think one of the bigger questions that I always get is just like, oh, what screening tools should you use? For me, I use, depending on what I'm getting an inclination of in terms of like diagnoses, I'm going to use probably like GAD-7. I'm going to use PCL-5. Any trauma related assessment, PCL-5 is a big one. I'll use Beck's depression inventory if I have to, if that's a concern that I'm getting. So I'll use a number of assessment tools depending on what I'm feeling like is going on with the client. And so you use their discretion, look into the data, look into the research about what's more effective in terms of like screening. But like being able to quantify sometimes can be really helpful for like the judges and the attorneys, because they're not therapists like us. So sometimes we need to break it down for them in that assessment, in that report, if that makes sense. And be mindful of not making any assumptions, right? Ask the questions, check in with your client, see how they're doing about the questions. You know, suspend your own judgment, suspend your own bias. Like, you are generally looking to learn and understand, and that's a place that you're coming from. And once you're mindful of that, I think that can help guide you in, like, you know, the questions that you're asking. So I think the other thing that's important is to validate and normalize the trauma that kind of took place for them. A lot of people don't necessarily come from countries that have a, you know, America's not the greatest in terms of like mental health care, but like we have a pretty strong system that we operate in. And so we have commonality around language, we have commonality around experiences. So normalizing that experience, letting your client know that they're, you know, they're not, you know, defected or something is wrong with them because they're experiencing them, and providing that psychoeducation for them around what is going on or what they're experiencing. And as you get to the end, I would say that it's really important just to make sure that you ask your client, you know, was there anything else that you thought was really important for me to add into this report? Anything that you feel like I missed, like, please let me know. Orient them back into the present. So whatever that process is like for you to get them back into the present space after talking about really heavy issues, make sure you incorporate that into the work that you do. Provide information about the next steps. So primarily what I say, so, you know, at this point, if I have any follow-up questions, is it okay for me to follow up with you? You know, definitely follow up with your attorney. I'm going to complete this report in 1 week, 2 weeks. I try to do mine in like a week and a half. I try to get things turned over pretty quickly. They can be cumbersome, so keep that in mind when you're generating prices and things like that. Like, it can take a lot of time, I'm not gonna lie. But I let them know that, hey, you know, the next steps, I'm going to complete this report. I'm going to give a first draft to your attorney. Your attorney is going to review it. Let me know if there are any, you know, updates I need to make or changes I need to make. And then at that point, you should communicate with your attorney moving forward. You could certainly offer them mental health therapy if you have the capacity to do so. Those type of things. You know, you talked about really heavy things. You kind of just, for, you know, morally speaking, and everybody's moral compass is different. You know, these people kind of endured a lot, but the thing you want to ask yourself also is, do they have the capacity to pay, things like that. So that can come up. You know, I've certainly worked with people after, you know, assessing them and doing that immigration evaluation. So definitely something to think about. And, you know, consider closing with a mindfulness or some sort of grounding technique. Like, again, we talked about some really heavy stuff during this past hour or 2 hours. You know, it's not uncommon for you to feel like heightened. You know, I want to do these exercises with you just so we can help calm you down, or, you know, bring you back to a place where you feel more grounded, and just kind of giving that information and providing the context of what this all means, right? Because again, we're working with people who aren't from this country and don't necessarily have the language or, you know, things like that around mental health and, you know, what they're experiencing. So providing, again, that's psychoeducation. We come into play with that as well. And then in terms of your report, so moving forward, so like, you conducted your interview, hopefully you found that helpful. And then in terms of your report, you want to make sure that you are tapping into the literature around trauma so that you can make you can drive your point further into for the judge or the whomever is looking over the case. So I definitely have literature that I have saved to my computer around, like, you know, families being separated, women experiencing domestic violence when they come to this country. Like, whatever the issue is at hand that you're assessing, make sure you have literature to back that up so that you can add it into your report. That can be really helpful. So again, just making sure you have some stuff on hand. I kind of have like a couple articles that I keep and then I cite in my report, just again to drive the point home for the attorney or for the judge or whomever is looking, the official that's looking over the case. And that's pretty much it, actually. So hopefully you have gotten a lot of information for this and that you feel a little more prepared in, like, going out and getting started. It really isn't that hard. You're already a licensed mental health therapist. You have the skill sets you already have. It's just about understanding how your role as an evaluator looks a little differently from the mental health therapist. And so let me know if you have any questions below, and hopefully you found this helpful, and I will see you on the other side. There's no need for me to gatekeep this information. Obviously it's a great way to make additional income as a therapist, and so I've been really blessed, and I want to bless you all. And so sometimes it can feel like people hold on to this information because they want to be the only one. It can only be me, it can only be me. Look, there's lots of opportunity out there for us, especially right now in this immigration crisis that we're in right now, and with, you know, bills, you know, what was it, it's SB something, I can't remember, but it expired a couple weeks ago. And you know, you got a lot of people sitting on the border who are seeking asylum status, so they are waiting for people like us. And again, going back to that marketing piece, like if you want to tap into those people, you need to figure out a marketing strategy to get you to those people. And I talked about that in my earlier video about immigration and assessments. So again, hopefully you found this helpful. Like, share, comment, and I'll see you soon. Take care.